The small town of Willow Creek was known for its peaceful streets and friendly faces. It was the kind of place where everyone knew each other, and crime was as rare as snow in July. That's why it came as a surprise when Officer Ryan found himself chasing down an elderly man on a chilly autumn afternoon. Harold Jenkins had lived in Willow Creek his entire life. At 72 years old, he walked with a slight limp, a reminder of injuries sustained during his time as a soldier decades ago. His grey hair was neatly combed, and his coat, though patched in places, was always clean. Harold wasn't wealthy, but he carried himself with quiet dignity. On this particular day, he had just finished shopping at the local grocery store and was slowly making his way home as Harold passed by the police station. Something unexpected happened. A gust of wind caught one of his bags, scattering oranges and canned goods across the sidewalk. Startled, Harold bent down to pick them up, fumbling slightly due to his arthritis. Unbeknownst to him, the sight of an older man struggling with a bag near a government building raised suspicions inside the station. Officer Ryan, a young and relatively inexperienced cop, noticed Harold through the window. To Ryan, the man looked nervous, glancing around frequently as if trying to avoid being seen. In truth, Harold was simply focused on gathering his groceries before someone tripped over them. But Ryan didn't know that. All he saw was an unfamiliar face acting strangely close to the station of potential threat. "Sir," Ryan called out as he stepped outside, his hand resting cautiously on his holster. "Can I help you?" Harold froze mid-reach, holding a can of soup in one hand. He looked up, his tired eyes meeting Ryan's stern gaze. "Oh, no trouble, son," Harold said softly, offering a polite smile. "Just dropped some things. Don't want these rolling into traffic." But Ryan wasn't convinced. Something about Harold's demeanor felt off. Maybe it was the way his hands trembled, not from fear, but from a jaw. Maybe it was the faded duffel bag slung over his shoulder. Whatever it was, Ryan decided not to take chances. "Mind if I ask what's in the bag?" Ryan asked, his voice firm. Harold hesitated for a moment, then replied, "Just some personal items, nothing special." Ryan frowned. "I'm going to need you to come inside with me, sir, for questioning." Harold's shoulders sagged slightly, but he nodded without protest. "All right, officer, if it'll make you feel better." As Ryan escorted Harold into the station, whispers broke out among the other officers. Some recognized Harold as the quiet veteran who occasionally attended community events, while others were unfamiliar with him entirely. Still, none of them questioned Ryan's decision, at least not yet. Once inside, Harold was seated in a chair near the front desk. He sat quietly, his hands folded in his lap, staring at the floor as though deep in thought. Ryan began filling out paperwork, jotting down details about the incident. Yet, even as he wrote, a nagging feeling crept into his mind. Was this really necessary? Why did the old man seem so resigned? Little did anyone know Harold's presence in the station would soon become far more significant than anyone could have imagined. For now, however, all they saw was an elderly man sitting silently, waiting patiently for whatever came next. And as the clock ticked on, the weight of unanswered questions hung heavy in the air. Inside the police station, the atmosphere was tense but quiet. Harold sat in the corner of the room, his duffel bag resting beside him. He didn't resist or complain. Instead, he stared at the floor as if lost in thought. Officer Ryan tried to focus on completing the paperwork, but something about the situation gnawed at him. Harold wasn't acting like someone with something to hide. There was no anger, no defiance, just a calm acceptance that seemed almost unnatural. Officer Laura, who had been sorting files nearby, couldn't help but overhear snippets of Harold's mumbles. Every now and then he would mutter phrases like classified and top secret, though they were too faint for anyone else to fully understand. At first, she dismissed it as harmless rambling, perhaps the result of old age. But after hearing Harold mention national security under his breath, curiosity got the better of her. "Who is this guy?" Laura whispered to Ryan when Harold wasn't looking. Ryan shrugged, flipping through the incomplete report. "Just some old man we picked up outside. Said he dropped his groceries." Laura frowned. "Then why does he keep talking about secrets?" Ryan paused, glancing over at Harold. The elderly man hadn't moved an inch since being brought in. His hands rested lightly on his knees, and his expression remained unreadable. For a moment, Ryan wondered if Laura was right. Was there more to Harold than met the eye? Unable to shake off her suspicions, Laura decided to dig deeper. She pulled up the station's database and typed Harold Jenkins' name into the system. What she found shocked her. According to public records, Harold was a decorated war veteran who had served multiple tours overseas. Medals for bravery, commendations for services file listed, accomplishments that most people could only dream of achieving. But what really caught Laura's attention was the note at the bottom of his record. Classified access restricted. Laura leaned back in her chair, her heart racing. How could someone so highly regarded end up sitting quietly in their holding area? Why would such a distinguished individual be flagged as having restricted information? Her mind raced with possibilities. Could Harold have been involved in something dangerous? Or was this all just a terrible misunderstanding? She turned to Ryan, lowering her voice. "You need to see this. This guy, he's not just some random old man. He's a hero, legit." Ryan's eyes widened as he read through the document. "What are we supposed to do now?" Before Laura could answer, Harold spoke up unexpectedly. His voice was soft but clear, cutting through the silence of the room. "I know you're wondering why I'm here," he said, looking directly at them. "And I wish I could tell you everything, but some things aren't meant to be shared, not even with good people like yourselves." The officers exchanged uneasy glances. Harold's words carried a weight that neither of them could ignore. It was as though he was speaking from experience, warning them without actually saying anything outright. Laura stepped closer to Harold, her tone gentle. "Mr. Jenkins, can you at least tell us if you're in any danger? Are you hurt? Do you need medical attention?" Harold shook his head slowly. "No, miss. I'm fine. Just tired. Tired of carrying burdens no one else understands." His response sent chills down Laura's spine. Whatever Harold was dealing with went far beyond dropping groceries on the sidewalk. Something bigger, something important was at play. And as the minutes ticked by, the officers began to realize that their initial judgment might have been horribly wrong. Unbeknownst to them, however, time was running out. Outside the station, two black SUVs approached silently, their tinted windows reflecting the fading sunlight. Within moments, the doors opened, and figures dressed in sharp suits stepped out, their badges gleaming under the streetlights. The arrival of the FBI agents would change everything for Harold, for the officers, and for the entire town of Willow Creek. Just as Officer Laura was about to ask Harold another question, the front door of the police station burst open. Two sharply dressed men and one woman entered, their presence commanding immediate attention. They moved with precision, their polished shoes clicking against the tiled floor. Each wore dark suits, sunglasses despite the fading light outside, and carried badges that gleamed under the fluorescent lights. FBI, one of them announced firmly, holding up his credentials. "We're here for Harold Jenkins." The room fell silent. Every officer turned to look at the agents, confusion rippling through the air. Even Harold seemed startled, though he quickly masked it with a stoic expression. For a moment, no one spoke. The contrast between the small-town cops and these federal agents couldn't have been starker. While the officers were used to handling minor disturbances like noise complaints or parking violations, these newcomers radiated authority and urgency. "Officer." Ryan stepped forward hesitantly, his voice tinged with disbelief. "Excuse me, but what's this about?" "We just brought him in for questioning." The lead agent, a tall man with sharp features and an even sharper tone, introduced himself as Agent Carter. "That's classified," he said curtly, brushing past Ryan without breaking stride. "Where is he?" All eyes shifted toward Harold, who remained seated calmly in the corner. His hands rested on his lap, and his face betrayed little emotion. If anything, he looked almost relieved to see the agents. Laura gestured toward him. Nervously, "He's right there. But can you at least tell us why we don't have time for explanations?" Agent Carter interrupted, cutting her off mid-sentence. He motioned to his colleagues, who immediately flanked Harold. One of them gently helped him to his feet, while the other retrieved his duffel bag from the floor. Harold offered a faint smile to the officers as he stood. "It's all right," he said softly, addressing Ryan and Laura. "They're here to help." Help. The word hung in the air, leaving more questions than answers. Help with what? What exactly had Harold gotten himself into? And why did the FBI care so much about an elderly man from a sleepy town like Willow Creek? As the agents escorted Harold toward the exit, Officer Ryan finally found his voice again. "Wait, you can't just take him without telling us something." Agent Carter paused briefly at the doorway, glancing back over his shoulder. His expression softened ever so slightly, though his tone remained firm. "Let's just say Mr. Jenkins has done more for this country than any of us will ever know. Trust me, he's safer with us." With that, the agents disappeared out the door, leaving behind a stunned group of officers. The sound of car doors slamming echoed from outside, followed by the low hum of engines pulling away. Within seconds, the black SUVs were gone, vanishing into the twilight as if they'd never been there at all. For a long moment, no one spoke. The station felt eerily quiet, the weight of what had just happened pressing down on everyone. Ryan sank into a chair, running a hand through his hair. "What just happened?" he muttered, shaking his head. Laura crossed her arms, staring at the empty space where Harold had been sitting moments earlier. "I don't know," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I think we messed up big time." The realization hit them hard. Harold wasn't just some random old man they had arrested, a national hero. Someone whose life was intertwined with secrets far beyond their comprehension. As guilt settled in, the officers began piecing together fragments of information that missed earlier: Harold's cryptic comments, his restricted file. The sudden arrival of the FBI at all pointed to one thing: Harold Jenkins was part of something much larger than they could have imagined, and now, thanks to their mistake, they might never fully understand the truth. The silence in the police station was deafening after the FBI agents left with Harold. Officer Ryan sat slumped at his desk, staring blankly at the unfinished paperwork in front of him. Laura paced back and forth, her mind racing as she replayed every detail of the past hour. The pieces didn't fit together neatly. Instead, they formed a puzzle too complex for anyone in Willow Creek to solve on their own. "Did you hear what he said?" Laura finally broke the silence, stopping mid-pace to face Ryan. "He's done more for this country than any of us will ever know." "What does that even mean?" Ryan sighed, rubbing his temples. "I don't know, but it sounds like we just arrested someone who's way out of our league." Laura nodded slowly. She couldn't shake the image of Harold sitting quietly in the corner, speaking softly about burdens no one else understood. It wasn't until now that she realized how heavy those words must have been. Whatever Harold had carried throughout his life, it wasn't just physical, it was emotional, psychological, and perhaps even dangerous. Determined to find answers, Laura decided to dig deeper into Harold's background. Though his file was classified beyond their clearance level, there were still public records available. She pulled up old newspaper clippings from decades ago, searching for anything that might shed light on the man they had so hastily detained. What she found astonished her. Decades earlier, Harold Jenkins had been part of an elite military unit tasked with dismantling a notorious espionage ring operating within the United States. The operation was top secret, and few details were ever released to the public. However, according to one article, Harold's team successfully neutralized the threat, saving countless lives in the process. Unfortunately, the mission came at a great personal cost. Several members of his unit lost their lives, and Harold himself returned home with injuries that plagued him for years. But the story didn't end there. Another report mentioned that remnants of the espionage ring survived underground, vowing revenge against those who had exposed them. Over time, these threats faded from headlines, dismissed by many as relics of the past. Yet Harold's recent actions suggested otherwise. Why else would the FBI show up so suddenly? Laura shared her findings with Ryan, whose guilt deepened with each revelation. "So, what you're saying is, Harold's been carrying this around all these years? That he's still involved somehow?" "It looks that way," Laura replied grimly. "And based on what Agent Carter said, I'd bet my badge that Harold uncovered something recently, something big enough to bring the FBI running." As they pieced the fragments together, another thought struck them. Harold hadn't resisted arrest or tried to explain himself when they brought him in. Instead, he accepted their mistake with quiet dignity. Was it because he knew the truth wouldn't change anything? Or was it simply because he was used to being misunderstood? Their reflections were interrupted by the sound of footsteps approaching. Startled, both officers looked up to see Sheriff Mitchell entering the station. His expression was stern, his jaw tight. "What's this I hear about you arresting Harold Jenkins?" he demanded, slamming a folder onto the counter. Ryan stood up nervously. "Sir, we didn't know." "You didn't know," the sheriff interrupted, his voice rising. "Do you have any idea who Harold Jenkins is? He's a legend around here, a war hero." "We know that now," Laura interjected quickly, stepping forward. "But we didn't then. And honestly, Sheriff, none of us could have guessed the kind of secrets he's tied to." Sheriff Mitchell paused, his anger softening slightly. After a moment, he sighed heavily and sank into a nearby chair. "Look, I get it. You made a mistake. But Harold deserves better than this. He gave everything for people like Oozfor, this country, and look where it got him." The room fell silent again as the weight of the sheriff's words settled over them. For the first time, Ryan and Laura truly understood the magnitude of their error. Harold wasn't just an ordinary citizen. He was a guardian of secrets, a protector of freedoms most people took for granted, and while they might never fully grasp the scope of his sacrifices, one thing was certain: Harold Jenkins was far more than the sum of his quiet demeanor and worn-out coat. Outside, the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the town. Somewhere in the distance, Harold sat in the back seat of an FBI vehicle, gazing out the window as the world blurred past. His journey was far from over, but for the officers left behind, the unraveling of the truth had only just begun. The weight of their mistake pressed heavily on Officer Ryan and Laura as the night stretched on. The station was quiet now, save for the occasional hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. Both officers sat at their desks, lost in thought, replaying every moment of Harold's arrest in their minds. Each memory felt like a punch to the gut, a reminder of how wrong they had been. Ryan broke the silence first, his voice low and filled with regret. "We messed up, didn't we, big time?" Laura nodded, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. "Yeah, we did. But sitting here feeling guilty isn't going to fix anything. We need to do something real to make it right." Her words sparked an idea in Ryan's mind. He leaned forward, determination flickering in his eyes. "What if we started by learning more about veterans like Harold? Maybe there are others in town who've served and don't get the recognition or support they deserve. If we can help them, maybe, I don't know, maybe it'll feel like we're making up for this somehow." Laura smiled faintly, appreciating his effort to turn guilt into action. "That's actually not a bad idea. We could organize a community event to honor veterans, invite people to share stories, raise awareness, that kind of thing. It won't undo what happened today, but it's a start." Sheriff Mitchell, who had been listening quietly from across the room, chimed in. "You two might be onto something. This town hasn't done enough for its veterans, not nearly enough. Harold's case is proof of that. Let's use this as a wake-up call." With newfound purpose, Ryan and Laura began drafting plans for a veteran appreciation event. They reached out to local organizations, contacted veteran support groups, and even arranged meetings with Willow Creek's mayor to discuss funding. Word spread quickly through the tight-knit community, and soon volunteers poured in, eager to contribute. As days passed, the officers also took steps to personally apologize to Harold. Though he was no longer in their custody, they managed to track down his address through public records. One evening, after their shift ended, Ryan and Laura drove to a small house on the outskirts of town. Its paint was peeling, and the yard was overgrown, but it exuded a sense of quiet resilience, much like Harold himself. They knocked hesitantly on the door, unsure of how he would react. When Harold opened it, his expression was calm, though tinged with surprise. "Officers," he said softly, stepping aside to let them in. Inside, the modest living room was sparsely furnished but spotless. Photos of Harold in uniform hung proudly on the walls, alongside medals displayed in glass cases. Ryan and Laura exchanged glances before Ryan spoke up. "Mr. Jenkins, we came here to say, to say we're sorry for everything. Arresting you was a huge mistake, and we should have handled things differently." Harold studied them for a moment, then nodded slowly. "I appreciate that, son. Mistakes happen. What matters is what you do next." Encouraged by his forgiving tone, Laura added, "We're working on something, a way to honor veterans like you, to make sure people understand the sacrifices you've made. Will you let us include you in it?" A soft smile crossed Harold's face, and for the first time, they saw a glimpse of the warmth beneath his reserved exterior. "I'd like that," he said quietly, "but remember, it's not about me. It's about all of us who served. About those who didn't come home." His words lingered in the air, reminding them of the deeper meaning behind their efforts. As they left Harold's house that evening, Ryan and Laura felt a renewed sense of purpose. Their guilt hadn't vanished completely, but it had transformed into motivation, a drive to ensure no other veteran would ever feel forgotten or misunderstood again. Little did they know, Harold's story was already inspiring change far beyond Willow Creek. News of his arrest, the subsequent involvement of the FBI, had reached national media outlets. People everywhere were talking about the quiet heroism of men and women like Harold, whose sacrifices often went unnoticed. For Harold, life continued much as it always had. He returned to his routines, tending to his garden and taking long walks at sunset. Yet, deep down, he felt a spark of hope, a belief that perhaps, finally, the world was beginning to see the truth. And as the sun set once more over Willow Creek, casting golden light across the horizon, the seeds of redemption were planted, not just for Ryan and Laura, but for an entire community ready to embrace its heroes. The weeks that followed Harold's arrest brought unexpected changes to Willow Creek. The small town, once content in its quiet routines, buzzed with newfound energy. Posters advertising the upcoming Veteran Appreciation event lined every street lamp and bulletin board. Local businesses donated food, supplies, and funds to ensure the gathering would be memorable. Even the mayor delivered a heartfelt speech at a council meeting, urging citizens to attend and honor those who had sacrificed so much for their freedom. On the day of the event, the park was transformed. Flags fluttered proudly in the breeze, and tables were set up with photographs, letters, and artifacts from veterans' lives. A stage stood at the center, where speakers including Sheriff Mitchell and a few decorated soldiers were scheduled to share stories of courage and resilience. Children ran around holding miniature American flags, while elders sat on benches, swapping tales of service and sacrifice. Harold arrived quietly, dressed in his old uniform jacket, adorned with medals. He walked slowly, leaning on a cane, but his presence commanded respect. As he entered the park, whispers rippled through the crowd. People turned to look, many recognizing him from news reports about his arrest. Some approached cautiously, offering handshakes or words of gratitude. "Thank you for your service," one young woman said, her voice trembling with emotion. Harold nodded politely. "It was an honor," he replied simply, as if deflecting attention from himself. Officer Ryan and Laura stayed close by, ensuring Harold felt comfortable throughout the day. They introduced him to others, sharing snippets of his story, without revealing classified details. To everyone present, Harold became a symbol of quiet strength, a reminder of the unsung heroes among them. Later, when it was time for speeches, Harold was invited to the stage. At first, he hesitated, shaking his head modestly, but the crowd erupted into applause, urging him forward. With a deep breath, he stepped up to the microphone, gripping it gently with weathered hands. "I'm not much for speeches," he began, his voice steady yet humble. "But I do want to say this. Serving my country wasn't just a duty, it was a privilege. And though I've carried scars, both visible and invisible, I wouldn't trade those experiences for anything. Because in protecting others, I found purpose." He paused, scanning the sea of faces before him. His gaze softened as he continued. "But let me tell you something else. Heroes aren't only those who wear uniforms. Heroes are also the people who remember us, the ones who take the time to listen, to care, to make sure we're not forgotten. So today, thank you for remembering, for being here. The crowd erupted into cheers, some wiping away tears. Harold stepped back, nodding briefly before returning to his seat. His words resonated deeply, leaving an indelible mark on everyone present. Afterward, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting warm hues across the sky, Officer Ryan approached Harold one last time. "You didn't have to say all that," Ryan admitted, his tone filled with admiration. "But thank you for everything." Harold smiled faintly. "We all do what we can for the ones we love, even if it costs us everything." Those final words lingered in Ryan's mind long after the event ended. They encapsulated Harold's life, a testament to selflessness, sacrifice, and unwavering dedication in the days that followed. The impact of the event spread far beyond Willow Creek. News outlets highlighted the town's efforts to honor veterans, sparking similar initiatives in neighboring communities. Schools incorporated lessons about military service into their curriculums, and local governments established programs to assist struggling veterans. For Harold, however, life returned to its familiar rhythm. He continued his daily walks, greeted neighbors warmly, and tended to his garden. Yet, beneath his calm exterior lay a quiet satisfaction, a belief that his story had inspired change. However small, and though Harold remained anonymous to most, his legacy lived on not through medals or accolades, but through the hearts and minds of those he touched. In honoring him, the nation took its first steps toward truly understanding the debt it owed to its heroes. Weeks turned into months, and the ripple effects of Harold Jenkins' story continued to spread far beyond Willow Creek. The Veteran Appreciation event had ignited a flame of gratitude and awareness that refused to fade. What started as a initiative blossomed into a nationwide movement, with communities across the country hosting similar gatherings to honor their own unsung heroes. Flags were raised higher, stories were shared louder, and forgotten veterans found themselves embraced by a society finally ready to listen. In Willow Creek, the changes were unmistakable. The park where the event took place became a permanent tribute to veterans, with a new memorial plaque unveiled at its entrance. Engraved on it were the words, "To those who served, sacrificed, and inspired us all." Beneath the inscription was a simple dedication, in memory of Harold Jenkins and all who walk quietly among us. Though Harold never sought recognition, his name became synonymous with resilience and humility. People often spoke of him in hushed tones, recalling how one man's quiet dignity had sparked such profound change. Officer Ryan and Laura, inspired by Harold's example, became staunch advocates for veteran rights. They worked tirelessly to ensure law enforcement officers received training on identifying and respecting former service members, vowing never to repeat the mistakes made during Harold's arrest. Harold himself remained largely unchanged by the attention. He attended a few follow-up events, but preferred staying out of the spotlight. Instead, he focused on his routines, gardening, walking, and occasionally visiting the local library to read history books. Yet, even in his solitude, Harold couldn't escape the warmth of newfound connections. Neighbors stopped by more frequently, bringing baked goods or simply sitting on his porch to chat. Children from the community began referring to him as Grandpa Harold, delighting in his gentle demeanor and the stories he sometimes shared about simpler times. One crisp autumn afternoon, Harold stood on his porch, gazing at the sunset. The sky blazed with hues of orange and pink, painting the horizon in fiery brilliance. As he watched, he felt a sense of peace, a quiet acknowledgement that his life, though marked by hardship, had not been lived in vain. Behind him, a soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Turning, he saw Officer Laura standing there, holding a letter. "Mr. Jenkins," she said, stepping closer, "this came for you today. It's from Washington." Harold accepted the envelope curiously, breaking the seal to find a handwritten note inside. It was brief but heartfelt, signed by a high-ranking government official. The message thanked Harold for his lifelong commitment to protecting the nation and assured him that his contributions would never be forgotten. For a moment, Harold simply stared at the paper, his eyes misty. Then, folding it carefully, he tucked it into his pocket. "Thank you for bringing this," he told Laura with a faint smile. Laura hesitated before speaking. "You deserve every bit of recognition you're getting, Mr. Jenkins. You've done so much for all of us." Harold shook his head gently. "It's not about me. It's about what we leave behind, the lessons, the memories, the hope. If my story helps someone else feel seen, then that's enough." As Laura left, Harold returned to his spot on the porch, watching the last rays of sunlight dip below the horizon. Somewhere in the distance, laughter echoed from the park where children played near the newly installed memorial. Their joy filled the air, mingling with the rustle of leaves and the chirping of crickets. Harold closed his eyes, savoring the moment. He knew his time was limited, as it was for everyone, but he also knew his legacy would endure not through monuments or speeches, but through the lives he had touched that night. As the stars emerged one by one, Harold sat alone in his living room, flipping through an old photo album. Each picture told a story of sacrifice, camaraderie, and love. Though the faces in the photographs were long gone, their spirits lingered, carried forward by Harold and others like him. And somewhere in the vast expanse of the universe, perhaps, those same spirits smiled down, knowing their sacrifices had not been in vain. For in honoring Harold Jenkins, the world had begun to heal, an act of redemption long overdue, yet beautifully timeless.